The Adventure of Ludwig II, told by Wanda. At the beginning of November 1877, my husband received the following letter. What remains within you of the new Plato? What can your heart offer? Love for love? Think, if all your desires have not been a lie, you have found what you seek. I am because I must be, your Anatoly. The letter was posted in Ischl, but gave a poste restante address in another town, Salzburg, I believe. Leopold was thrown into a state of intense excitement and curiosity. The letter alluded to one of the stories in The Heritage of Cain, The Love of Plato. The writing was that of a person of distinction. Who could it be? A man? It was impossible to tell. At any rate, it seemed to promise an interesting adventure, and was not to be dismissed lightly. Trembling with emotion, Leopold answered, Your words roused my soul as the storm rouses the ocean, as the wind lifts the waves to the stars, but needlessly, for a star has descended to me from the skies. Friendship for friendship and love for love. How can I hesitate when you tell me that I have found the object of my sacred desire, the desire that dwells in me both in broad daylight and in the mysterious darkness of night, when Anatoly has appeared in my dreams to deprive me of all rest, all sleep. If you are Anatoly, I am yours. Take me. With all my soul, Leopold. My husband awaited the reply with indescribable tension. At last it arrived, as follows. Have you never wept within yourself? Here I am, dry-eyed, and I feel the tears flowing one by one in my heart. I tremble with fear, and my soul seems to struggle violently to free itself from its prison of flesh. You pervade all my being. I have just received your letter, and since reading it, I know only one thing, that I love you infinitely, as only you can be loved, as only Anatoly can love. Anatoly, oh, it is I. All that is good, noble, and ideal in me will be yours. I want to kindle within me the divine spark that is in every man, until it grows into a flame dedicated to you. And if this pure, spiritual, and sacred love does not make me your Anatoly, then I am not he. I am Anatoly, your Anatoly. What a child I was to doubt it, to sin against the mysterious miracle working within us. Now it has come to me with terrifying clarity. We belong to each other for all eternity, ceaselessly, endlessly. Or do you think that such a love can die with us? This is the aim of my life, the reason for my existence on this earth, to be the object of your longing, to link you to me irrevocably, proud, pure spirit. This is great indeed. This is divine. It was eccentric, but there was something to be said for it. It could add some spice to literature. It was exactly what Leopold needed. Besides, is a fine work of art any the less fine if it is made up of abnormality and falsehood? Thus I was determined to lend a hand in this venture as far, naturally, as I should be allowed. It was most interesting to observe Leopold. When he replied to the letters, he was convinced that he really was the ideal man that others took him for, and yet he found himself very pathetic. But once he had sent off the letters, his enthusiasm was somewhat dampened, and he began to see the whole matter in a more practical light. Whereas the exaltation of his correspondent seemed quite genuine, my husband knew that his own was not, and that although he did not admit it to himself, he was entirely fabricating it. Besides, the love of Plato was not his style at all, and the man who wrote under the name of Anatoly must have known very little about Sacher-Masoch to have imagined otherwise. Leopold believed and sincerely hoped that it was a woman, but because he was afraid of creating a conflict between us, he pretended to believe and to desire quite the opposite. In either case, the spiritual relationship in question was nothing but a lie. However, it was the kind of lie to which he used to cling with all his might, and which he never would have recognized as such, even if it had been exposed to the full light of the truth, because it was the foundation of his faith in himself and in his moral worth. Without this faith he could not have survived. This exalted Anatoly, as blind as a child, this woman in love surrendering her soul, made me sorry, for I could see the day of disillusionment dawning. Our correspondent seemed to know nothing of Sacher-Masoch's personal life. How could he be ignorant, for example, of the fact that he was married? Plato married? Anatoly had certainly never dreamt of that. The correspondence continued. As the letters were never posted from the same place, and the address to which one had to reply was always different, the letters took a long time to arrive. They came from Salzburg, Vienna, Paris, Brussels, or London. Clearly, Anatoly wanted at all costs to establish a personal relationship, even if the identity of his correspondent was to remain secret. This irritated Anatoly. What was the use of a personal relationship when their love was spiritual? He tried to avoid the issue, but he was not reckoning with Leopold's eloquence and persistence. Finally, after prolonged hesitation and, so to speak, in a gesture of despair, Anatoly consented to an interview, under the express condition that Leopold follow point by point the instructions he would lay down for him. Obviously, the man had much to lose from an indiscretion, and was indeed afraid that one might occur. Leopold naturally accepted the conditions. It was arranged that the interview should take place in Bruck. The choice of a place where we had lived for so long and had only recently left, where Sacher-Masoch was well known, and where a chance occurrence could, without him being in any way responsible, reveal to him the identity of his friend, only confirmed my impression that Anatoly knew nothing of the circumstances of our life. It was a dreadfully cold December day when my husband set out. He had been told which train to take, and he was to stay at the Bernauer Hotel, where he was to wait, blindfolded, in a completely dark room with tightly drawn curtains, until midnight, when he would hear 3 knocks at the door. At the 3rd knock only he was to say, "Come in," and not make any movement. Such precautions could only make sense if they were planned by a woman. Coming from a man, they would have seemed ridiculous. My husband therefore took leave of me tenderly, in the firm belief that he was about to spend the night with a beautiful woman. That night I could not have slept more peacefully. I did not consider that I had the right to let any petty considerations interfere with an affair that could be so interesting and valuable to my husband. Once I had made up my mind on this point, I had the strength not to think of it further. Besides, Leopold, except where the sex of his new acquaintance was concerned, had shown complete loyalty to me, and I certainly considered this an attenuating circumstance to what was happening at that moment in Bruck. He returned the next day as full of trepidation and doubt about Anatoly as when he left. Here is what he told me. On arrival in Bruck, he went directly to the Bernauer Hotel, took supper there, and was given a room where he waited. After a short while, a letter from Anatoly was delivered to him, 3 pages of close writing that expressed all his anguish at the thought of what he was about to do, his intense joy at the prospect of the interview, and his dread of its consequences. If Leopold had still harbored the slightest doubt about the sex of the person he was waiting for, this letter should have dispelled it. Only a woman of high social position whom the slightest indiscretion could endanger gravely, could possibly write such a letter. It was so pleading, so desperate, it implied such great perils, that Leopold was seized with pity and also with fear at the idea of the responsibility he was taking on. He thought for a moment of withdrawing, and regretted not being able to communicate this intention to Anatoly, whose name he was not allowed to pronounce. He had no choice but to follow the course of events. Besides, these feelings disappeared over the long waiting period. The desire awakened by the mysterious and beautiful woman soon had the better of his pity. When the hour of midnight approached, and he drew the curtains, blindfolded himself and waited, every nerve in his body taut, for the last few minutes to elapse, he was firmly resolved to grasp and never to lose hold of the happiness that fate was bringing within his reach. On the last stroke of midnight, Leopold heard heavy steps ascending the stairs and drawing near to his room. He was convinced that it was a hotel servant bringing him another letter which would shatter his hopes, and was about to take the kerchief off his eyes when he heard the 3 light, cautious knocks that were the agreed signal. He cried, "Come in," and heard the door open, and then the same heavy steps ring out in the room. So it was a man. As my husband tried to master his disappointment, a fine musical voice filled with emotion said, "Leopold, where are you? Guide me. I cannot see a thing." My husband took the hand that was held out to him and led the unknown visitor toward the sofa where they both sat down. "You must admit that you were expecting a woman," said the voice. Leopold's agitation at the unexpected appearance of a man had soon died down, since it was not a woman whom he could cast into the role of Venus in furs. Then he would make the man into the Greek, which would be better still. So his voice was quite composed when he replied, "After your last letter, I was afraid it might be so. You surround yourself with such mystery." "Afraid? Then you are not disappointed?" The ice was soon broken, and the two men began to converse. Anatoly talked endlessly of love, but of a spiritual and immaterial love, and he finally confessed to Sacher-Masoch that although he was young and virile, he had never laid hands on a woman, but was pure in both body and soul. The man who said these words was no longer an adolescent. He was still young, it is true, but he was a man, taller and stronger than Leopold, and he had never touched a woman. What could this mean? My husband possessed a dangerous eloquence that was gripping, if not convincing, and whoever found themselves exposed to it without warning never failed to succumb to its influence. This is what happened to Anatoly, who was moreover in a very emotional state during the whole time the interview lasted. Leopold easily captured his mind and maneuvered him into the position he had planned. He told him that he was married, that he had a charming wife and a child as beautiful as an angel, and that it was delightful still to be in love with his wife after 5 years of marriage. Anatoly, touched, said almost humbly, "Oh, I am grateful to you. You have relieved me of a great fear." "Are you handsome?" asked Sacher-Masoch, who was still blindfolded. "I do not know." "Are you considered handsome?" "I am a man. Who would ever tell me if I were?" "You yourself. You are handsome, I can feel it. With such a voice you must be. But perhaps you would not find me attractive after all." You are my master and my king. But if you are so afraid, show yourself first to my wife Wanda. She knows me. If she tells me that I may see you, then I shall believe her." Thus one of them was being pressed by the other, and was retreating. It was time to take leave. They exchanged adieus. My husband felt a burning kiss on his hand, and they parted. Leopold took the next train to Graz. The correspondence started again. I was now involved personally. Leopold sent him photographs of us both, and asked him for his, but he always put off sending it. A correspondence subject to so many detours becomes tedious. Besides, excursions into the infinite realm of fantasy are the privilege of the idle rich. The practical problems and painful realities of life soon bring one down to earth. Even my husband's interest in the affair began to fade. He was sensitive to the wounding aspect of these continual protestations of love, coupled with such mistrust. The mistrust was of course understandable, although Sacher-Masoch would have shown complete discretion in all respects. But it could not go on indefinitely. We were caught within an endless circle, and my head was beginning to spin. I therefore wrote Anatoly an unequivocal letter. It had the desired result. We received a letter of farewell, covering many sad and painful pages. "Leopold, I have given up peace of mind, the gentle bliss of friendship, the joys of life, and all the pleasure in the world in the exquisite hope of finding a resting place in your heart. And what have I gained? An ardor, a torment that consumes me, and the agony of my own desire increased 1,000-fold by your senseless reproaches. After a long struggle with myself, I have finally embarked on the most difficult, the only action of my life. I am seized by dread when I think how you will interpret these words. I have read Wanda's letter, and each sentence deeply touched my heart. If you wish me to believe that your love is sincere, then act like a man. For 2 long days I have had to struggle with my selfish feelings. I have emerged victorious. I am speaking to you for the last time, and I am calling you Leopold, my beloved, my greatest, most sacred gift, for Anatoly bids you farewell. I have severed all relations with the mail, and I shall receive no more letters after you read this one. You will write in vain. And now let me tell you how I reached this decision. Your desire to have me near you cannot be realized. In this material world, there is no spiritual love. Even you cannot sustain it, and neither, perhaps, can I. Some months later, we received the following letter. Leopold, come what may, I know that I do not want to leave you, that I cannot leave you. A blockhead of a bookseller has just sent me one of your books. It reached me in the middle of my struggle between renunciation, love, and despair. Come what may, I am yours, you are mine, and you will have me by your side, but not just yet. Be patient for a few months, and I shall be with you forever. I am willing to give up anything, to suffer anything for you. Do you still love me? Do you still believe in your Anatoly? 1,000 kisses to Wanda. And the old game started up again, with the same hesitation and the same doubts. A deceitful game, moreover. Distrust on the one hand, dishonesty on the other. My husband, who still clung to the image of the Greek, was in a permanent state of tension and excitement. Now that I knew where the affair was bound to lead us, I regretted having taken any part in it. I was pleased when it was broken off and deplored that it had been resumed, for I was afraid it might come to an ugly end. In May, the day before an exceptional performance at the Thalia Theatre, I cannot recall on what occasion, we received a note from Anatoly saying that he would be at the theatre and would like to see us there. We did not even know that he was in Graz. Leopold was very excited. Sasha was coming with us, and Anatoly would see our beautiful child. The open boxes of the Thalia Theatre allowed their occupants to be seen clearly. Anatoly, whom we did not know, had the advantage of being able to recognize us from our portrait, while we had no hope of distinguishing in a packed house a person we had never set eyes on. Anatoly had mentioned in a letter that he looked like the young Lord Byron, and Leopold thought he had seen a man of this description hidden behind a pillar in the entrance hall, but he did not want to stare at him indiscreetly, and allowed himself to be carried along by the crowd. What a strange sensation it is to sit for hours on end in the knowledge that somewhere 2 eyes are riveted on one, scrutinizing with feverish ardor every feature of one's face. This act of spying showed a lack of generosity on the part of our friend Anatoly, but men who live in the clouds are no doubt more sensitive to divine than to human magnanimity. What a relief when the play was over and our self-exposure came to an end. The next day, another letter came from Anatoly asking us this time to go to the Elephant Hotel. We were to wait in the dining room until he sent us word, for this time he wanted to speak with us. We obeyed his instructions, and after we had been sitting in the dining room for a little while, a servant asked Leopold to follow him to the gentleman who was expecting him. Leopold returned shortly afterward and told me that Anatoly wished me to go to his room, and that a servant was waiting to take me there. I went, determined to put an end to all this nonsense. The servant, who was no mere porter and had a certain style about him, led me up a staircase and along several corridors to an elegant and brilliantly lit drawing room, and then on into a room that was in complete darkness. I was left standing there, unable to see a thing.
"Oh, Wanda, please come here."
"Is that you, Anatoly?"
"Yes."
"You will have to guide me. I cannot see." A moment's silence, then a slow, hesitant step in my direction. A hand groped for mine and led me to the sofa. The person who had drawn near to me and who was now sitting by my side was certainly not the Anatoly that Leopold had spoken with in Bruck. He was small, and it was obvious even in the dark that he was deformed. His voice had the almost childlike tone of a hunchback's. It was not rich and deep like that of the Anatoly who had so fascinated my husband. Who could he be? I spoke to him, but the poor man was so frightened that he could hardly reply. I left quickly, out of pity for him. When I told Leopold about my Anatoly, he was as perplexed as I was. The person he had spoken to was the same as the one in Bruck, the same tall, well-built man with the beautiful deep voice. Full of resentment, I wrote to Anatoly as soon as we reached home. I allowed him to think that we had not noticed the difference, and I said that I now knew the true reason behind his refusal to let us see him, namely his appearance, and that I was saddened to think that he did not realize how such mistrust would wound us. This is briefly the gist of what I wrote to him, and I posted the letter that very evening. The next day, as we were all sitting in the dining room after luncheon, the doorbell rang. The maid handed me a letter and said that the gentleman who wrote it was awaiting a reply. The note was from Anatoly, or rather from the unfortunate man with whom I had spoken at the Elephant Hotel. He was asking me to see him alone. As I entered my bedroom, which served as a sitting room, a short, deformed young man with reddish blonde hair and a pale, gentle, and sad face, such as many invalids have, entered through the other door. An indescribable and painful emotion caused him to tremble. His serious, soulful eyes looked at me, so pleading and so timid that I was seized with pity, and I rushed up to him, took both his hands in mine, and spoke to him affectionately. He fell on his knees before me and hid his face in my lap. Stifled sobs racked his poor deformed body. I laid my hands on his head to calm him down. I no longer remember what I said to him, but my words certainly came from the depth of my heart, for his boundless grief moved me to deep pity. When he raised his tear-stained face to me, his smile was full of happiness and gratitude. "I am leaving tonight by the 11 o'clock train. Would you do me the kindness of coming to the National Theatre with Leopold, so that I may see you until the last moment and breathe the same air as you? When the performance is over, I shall wait for you in my carriage, by the cathedral, in the hope that you will not refuse me the favor of a last handshake, a farewell kiss." That evening we went to the theater, and after the performance we walked across to the carriage which was standing in the shadow of the cathedral. As we drew close, a face wearing a mask appeared at the window of the carriage, and two arms reached out to Leopold and drew him close in a long embrace. In turn, my hands were grasped, and I felt his burning kiss upon them. The masked man slumped back into his seat, the window was shut, and the carriage drew away. Not a word had been exchanged during the whole scene. We stood there speechless, our eyes following the flight of the mystery as it disappeared into the dark night. Who was it? Anatoly or the cripple? We had no idea. We received another farewell letter which ended with a reproach. We had not been capable of spiritual love, and thus we had broken the spell, etc. The letter was entirely confused and incomprehensible, perhaps intentionally so, although the writer claimed that he was expressing himself clearly and frankly. We did not reply. A few years later, a chance occurrence convinced us almost with certainty of Anatoly's identity. In 1881, we spent part of the summer in Hubach, near Passau, and we made the acquaintance of Dr. Grandier. He was a physician, but did not practice, and held the position of director of the Munich Hoftheater. He was both a scientist and a great connoisseur of the arts, and we spent many pleasant hours in his witty and congenial company. One day, as we were talking about art and the treasures of the Bavarian royal castles, he mentioned the artistic tastes of Ludwig II and spoke of the king's eccentricity, his relationship with Richard Wagner, their strange correspondence, the aversion the king had for the company of men, his distant attitude to women, his solitary nature, and his passionate and unsatisfied yearning for an ideal life. Our interest was aroused by what Dr. Grandier was saying. It had such a familiar ring about it. We looked at each other with the same name on our lips, Anatoly. When the doctor had finished speaking, I asked him point blank, "What about the little deformed man who is said to be the king's friend?" "Ah, you must be thinking of Prince Alexander of Orange, the eldest son of the King of Holland. A poor devil." Wanda von Sacher-Masoch, Confessions of My Life.